다 류셈기 녀랭이 바까고 대라 아니 류디 셈기 녀랭 쳐바이나 아니 시빌룰라 셈 아니 미독베 태월 다 주그리에서 뉴저 땅 용도 디 렌데라 가지기 괜요 말에 아니 시빌룰레 셈미게데 아니 시빌룰디라 아니 셈기에게 긴 욱미도 와스 다 딜렌디 겸바와 다 딜렌디 겸윤데 아니 텔라 랑루기 아니 욱테야 아니 코 일로 똑베기 아니 일로 똑베기 똑기 욱중 수중구도 마도 아니 욱디 욱이 똑기 일로 똑발로 수디 지금이도 스타 가장 아주 디버도 침발해 디인디 대여도 왕주실 아니 텔레중 테마 인스 가장 아주 디버도 침발봐.
So yesterday where we came was where we're refuting that the body is a substantial cause of the mind, and the first refutation was the body is not a substantial cause of the mind. If it was, then in a dead body or a corpse one would also have to see the mind arise, but that's not the case. To which then the opponent replied by saying it's not necessary that a dead body should create consciousness, because the condition which supports the arising of consciousness from the body, or the transformation of certain aspects of the body into consciousness, is breath. And because this breath is not there, the condition that is required for the arising of consciousness is absent. To which then Acharya Dharmakirti further objected, saying it's not the case that breath is the cause of consciousness. In fact, it's the other way around, because conceptual mental cognition is what determines the existence of breath or not, or the kind of breath or not, and not the other way around. So it's not breath that acts as a cause for the conceptual mental cognition, but it's the other way around. And after having said that, to conclude that, the verse that we read yesterday was, if it exists, that exists powered by it. Therefore, from it comes breathing, not that.
다 일로 중요디 긴 우기도기 아니 일로 중요요레스 키랑 가지기 두스 라바나시 쳬바이나 아니 우 중요디 긴 가르기 중요요레스 다 파르 치버디 땅고여시.
So then now there's a further question that's brought up, and the question is, okay, fine, you say that the mental cognition arises from breath. Where does breath come from? What's the cause of breath?
수자 룽짐바다 짐바인 룽짐바다 짐바니 베조메바 칸리인스 시두 칸라 유로 중위 긴디 다 제바나라 유로 중위 긴 우기나 아니 우 짐바다 짐바 룽짐바다 짐바디 아니 유로기 베조메바 중기 요바이나 아니 코랑기 규카리레 에스타디 베조메바 규칼리 중와이 에스타 치워디지.
So there's the next verse, which is the exhalation and inhalation of breath, how could it not come from effort? And so after having asked, or in concerning the question, where does breath come from? Here it says, how can you say that inhalation and exhalation, so when you breathe in and you breathe out, how can you say that that is not coming from effort?
다 우기 규 류인셔나스 아니 우디양 아니 가르기 또 용기요레스나 우디양 그런 규디 류리 용기요레스 라바이나스.
So now then the opponent here replies by saying, so the text says, if you retort that the cause of breath is the body,
딜라바이나 아니 대달라인 태와 송스 아니 대달라인 태와 송스 라바이나 아니 욱대다 시빌룰라얀 도과메베 태와 응알 시빌룰라 셈미도베 태와 주고 나시 아니 시빌룰라얀 욱미도바 탈스 가르지나나 욱중웨 규소디 류이나 아니 다다 시빌룰라 류여와 시빌로데 류도와스 다 텔라야 욱중웨 태와 응알 셰발 따와나시 욱라인 태와다 가라 찍어 주고 그랬어.
So after they reply that the cause of breath is the body, then to that Acharya Dharmakirti replies by saying, for those assertions, there would be the same consequences, saying that the same consequences that arose for a dead body giving rise to consciousness, now if you assert that the cause of breathing or breath is the body, the same consequences will follow also for breath, because a dead body still has a body, there's still a body, and if that is the body is the cause of breathing, then you should have breath that arises from a dead body as well.
다디 라비인데 아니야 가지기 술 내봤다지 다 계란할 텐데 라바이네 계란라이 직바레스 원나 상게버 계란라이야스 가지스 원나 상게버 계란라이야스 아니 시빌룰라 쇠미도베 태와 충고 주구레스 김쟁 가르친 라바이나 아니 치신비 내거기 미텔라 셈이 요르와스 아니 셈 치마기 녀렌데 셈부와스 셈리 셈 중고요 라바인데 아니 시빌룰텔라야 셈 용고 지그르와스 가이스나 디마시 공기 가서 타마들 시스템도 왔어. 이 결혼라야 아니 로델 시빌룰라 셈도비 결혼라인 태와 충보 주그레스.
After this, after having said or shown how there would be the same consequences to a presentation where the body is the substantial cause, then here the opponent now turns around and says, well, doesn't the same apply for you Buddhists as well? And the way in which they say that is, if you Buddhists claim that the substantial cause of the mind, or what transforms into the mind, is a previous state of mind as well, then won't you also have the same consequences that a dead body should have the mind? Because at the last moment, when the body was still alive, there was a mind, and you're saying that that mind is the substantial cause of a next moment of mind. In that case, wouldn't the same also be applicable to you, that a dead body should be able to generate consciousness, or would have consciousness, because before it died there was consciousness, and that consciousness you claim to keep producing other moments of consciousness.
다 디기 렌텔라 아니 셈규 인에 충마인스 네비 페제 현다장 강실 균이 임바되스 다 디기 가릴라 볼라나 셈가마데 셈치만 일랭기 규 임바 이나야스 셈가마 셈치마게 일랭기 규레 아 임바 손자 딘디기 드니 미 시갈라모게 드니 치셈 타마데라 셈 요바레데 아니 딘디기 셈 류치마라 셈 용구르베스나 용구 말레스 김쟁 가르치는라나 셈가마 셈치마게 규 임바 이나야 충규 말레스 미숭구 김제 가레 딘디기 셈디 류나나 네발라 편지 규심바지에 가서 구루 와스 편지 규심바지 가서 킬링도 와스 네비 편지 현다장 강지 균이 임버드스 이 김쟁기 아니 셈디 류르 네발라 편지 규심바지 고레 규심바디 마찬나 아니 셈디 류르 네투고 말레스 디인디 시빌룰라 셈미도베 태와디 나무상게벌 주고 말레스.
So in reply to this objection that they come up with, which is, well then shouldn't also the mind of a dying person create the next moment of mind, which would then lead to a dead body also having consciousness? The reply is in the verse which says, if the mind were the cause, it would not be the same, because it abides due to another propelling factor that is asserted as the cause. The meaning of this is, so when Acharya Dharmakirti replies, he says, for us Buddhists to say that the mind is the substantial cause of mind, this problem does not arise for us, because even though we say that the mind is the substantial cause of the next moment of mind, the reason why the mind and body stay conjoined for the duration that they do is because we speak of, or we are saying that there's another condition or another cause that makes them abide together. And that other cause that makes them abide together is this propelling factor. I think sometimes it's also translated as projecting. Yeah? So I don't know which one to choose, I think. So there's another cause, however, that they assert, that we Buddhists assert, which is, along with consciousness that requires consciousness to arise, there also has to be another factor, which is karma over here, which is a propelling factor, or propelling karma, projecting karma. And because we assert that also to be the cause that is necessary for the mind and the body to stay conjoined together, just because there is the mind at the last moment of death, it doesn't follow that it will have to produce a subsequent moment of mind that stays conjoined with the body.
So that shivilula deba shivilula sem midobe tewa tsungwa mainde pinjigi lede lula sem nibi gyushin yimbar debichirs na wasangebe debichirs.
So the commentary says the same consequence that the mind would not cease in a dead body would not apply to us, because we assert a different cause that makes the mind abide in the body, which is propelling karma.
Ngelang sem midobe tewa de jubo maindes tayang khajigi lengyang warta Malaya, Nishibilu Semidu Tewadi and Jugumares, Mijubi Jumzen Karireslana, and Zawala. Kede Dombo La Soshin, Nebe Midun Lugumits. Right? Di Karse Gorsedu, Takarans Section Toy Yure. Chidanga dinde Shingle Meparna, Shingle Mebargiroda, Shingle Sanum Soro Chuja, and Meparwaina, or Shing Mebargova. Ta Mebar Yungu or the Susan, Shin Koranla, Shin Cambodella, Tene Mebare Korangi, Korangone, Yu Korangone Chigiobache, and Ted and Yambani, Meshambachi Chevaina, Coshingle Mebar de Diponam de Tondiache. Ta ready in a young, and not dubding it today. Not dubne, Nagi Nubachumbo top ding it in Digi. Tini Shingdela Nagi Nuba Tapse, Top Pujabse, Nagi Nuba to Stapse, and Shingle Mepari, Shingdel Mebargium. Chishna Keraso the Tonio.
So, in reply to this, the opponent turns around and says, well, then even I don't have the same fault. That the mind does not end at the time of death because, and the reply that they give over here is just like with a wick, just like with a wick and so on, faults create an unconducive body which is not the cause. And so the example that they're giving here, you might have seen this, some of you might have seen this. Generally, if you have wood or firewood, and you, I don't know, whatever, there's like a fuel or something that you put on it and you light it on fire, the wood itself has a combustible quality, which then when it comes in contact with fire, it catches fire. But there are certain situations, I don't know if any of you have seen this, you might have, where there are some people who can do incantations, and with an incantation, and when that is performed on wood, even though it maintains that combustible quality, this thing that has been done, or the spell that has been cast, it prevents the wood from catching fire. Maybe some of you have seen this.
So the Jahana the Limanguyore, Shidanga Cha Mabo, Chagoma was like it over Cha Mabo, Tanga to Chile Shaban, and the Chile Tiru, and I'm me Kumajin and the Chile Tiru, Tana Shingi, any Shingla Mepar Sukul, the Chaban, and the Sukut Tiru, Kodinam you dirwa. So that Drubding it, Yogi dinde, Sadu dinde, Nubachumbo Yoding it in there, and Chama Maya, Chil Datu Gorta. Nagi Nubegitini, ko Megi Segbi Chawa de Pakachi, to Chilega to Shevana, Chile Matia. Tana Shingi, Shing Mepar Subuga, not too good, and Mekoranga to stay in a Pakachi Sigmidwa, or the Dindigi, Tonya Yore, Get Tonya, Baji, or the Jagana doing it in the Manguyos.
So in India, it's quite common where certain sadhus or yogis, because they've done certain practices with certain mantras, then they take like hot burning pieces of metal like that, red, and they can put them on their tongue, they put them on their body, they do all of these things. And because they have certain abilities, or they have certain abilities that they've attained, then when they have certain mantras that they recite, the ability of fire to burn, or the ability of fire to make something else catch fire or burn something else, that gets compromised. And I've seen this many times. And in India, it's quite common that you see sadhus or yogis do stuff like that.
So that Kogi Kaji Pe Karikogolana, Didigi Shingle, Chidam Meke, Shingle Chidam Meke, Nuba Yonaya, in a Nagi Nuba Digi, and Shingle Meke, Nuba de Seshavina, and Shingle Mebargimi was, Petina Shin, and another Shivi Lutela. Chidang Luli Stem Gigi Yorde, she will Luli Stem Karji Migelana, and she said you Lutella, Tangazo Miduncho, and Nibe, that Nazadinde, Nazagi, and Lutil Semgi, nobody called Negi Jombarista, Pedina, Negi Jomba Cheje, and she will Luli Stem with Tawangala Meres, that won't land it after.
So the example that they're using is this one of wood, which technically should catch fire, or any combustible substance that should catch fire. So with a spell or with a certain mantra, because someone has an ability, what this does is it obstructs the combustible quality of wood from catching fire. So wood will not catch fire. In the same way, this is the example that they're using, and they're using this example to say, in the same way, a body that has certain obstructions or obstacles will not be able to produce a next moment of consciousness. So when you die, what happens is there are certain obstacles that come in, such as diseases or physical ailments, or your physical condition is no longer supportive or conducive for creating life, and because it does not create life or cannot support life, because now there is something that has intervened, which is a disease or a sickness or an ailment, that is why the body then is unable to produce a next moment of consciousness. That's what we call death, and that's why the faults of a dead body having to have consciousness do not apply to me, because I say something comes in between and intervenes with the body just before it dies, which is these diseases, and makes it unconducive, like the mantras make fire unconducive in its ability to produce fire. Firewood becomes unconducive to produce fire. That's the example.
제바 시위류 셈기 규민데 시위류기 셈기 규미시데 민데 녜바 룽지 속에 셈네바도 미튠바 체비 예시 빼나 나기 따비 동불라 메미바로 신노스 따딘데 랍시.
So the commentary says a dead body is not the cause of the mind, because problems such as bile, phlegm and so on make it inhospitable. For example, when a wick has been cast with a spell, it cannot catch fire.
다 딜라랑루기 팔 뇌제 갔던 거래 시위 녜바 냠뷰르세 라연 초와 다도 겨스 다 녜바 룽지 베겐라 소바 네기 아니 시위 류텔라 셈 깨발라 미튠바 제바 임바 이나스 아니 기지 시위 류텔라 맨 땅제 시위 류 고란라 맨 땅제 고란라 녜바 나자 카레 요바 딜 맨 땅제 나자디 메와 소요소나 아니 랑자 셈 기기르 베스 다 티와디 땅시 셈 깨바 티기르스다.
So the reply Acharya Dharmakirti gives is, when the faults weaken, the commentary is, a dead body is not the cause of the mind. Okay, we read that. When the faults weaken because of death, so the reply is, once again it should come back to life. And so Acharya Dharmakirti is saying, well, if you're saying it is an imbalance with the humors, this is those three humors again. If there is an imbalance with the humors, and then these humors you're saying, when they come in a state of imbalance, they become disease, and when disease arises, it obstructs the body's ability to produce consciousness. If that's what you say, then it would also follow that if you have a dead body and you were able to intervene in some way, either by treating it or whatever you might do, to then bring the humors out of a state of imbalance again in a dead body, it would follow that that dead body now again should give rise to consciousness, because the obstacles that were there can be removed in a dead body, in a corpse. Which is why it says when the faults, so when these humors, the faults or the obstacles, when these weaken because of death, once again it should come back to life. So the commentary says when a body is dead and the faults of bile, phlegm, etc. decrease, the mind should once again come back to life.
다이안텔라 카지기 랭 가르쳐래 게데 맨니 도나야 신기 규르와 미도신 게네 도고 메제나스.
So to this reply, then the opponent again, wherever you see, if one says with the inverted commas, that's the opponent. So the opponent says, if one says, so the opponent says, even though fire is extinguished, the changes to the wood are not reversed. Similarly, this too cannot be reversed.
So the 당한저 싱라 메파르제 싱라 메파르제 싱 메반네 아니 싱디 텔라 규르소나 아니 메세샤바이나 야 텔라디 수랑제 싱라 수 로구 마르와 메도나 디랑제 수 로구 마르와 디나 신셰제 녜발룽티다 녜발룽티로 소바 네기 아니 류리 셈케와 미딘쇼라 녜바직 제사바이나 도 아니 셈직 도 사바이나 다 디젤라 아니 코 네디 메바 차바이나야 코츠 로구 마르스다 셰바디 수랑제 킹 마르스. So
they're giving an example over here of why it does not revert, or why mind does not come back. And the reason that they're saying is, for instance, if you take wood and you set it on fire, and that wood turns to ash, even if you extinguish the fire, the ash doesn't revert to a previous state of being wood. Similarly, when the body has been obstructed by disease, and because of this obstruction, the body has now become inhospitable in its ability to generate the mind, or incapable to generate the mind. When these diseases or these obstructions go away, like ash does not turn back to wood even though it has, after it has been set on fire, and the fire might cease. So the fire would be like the disease. Even though the disease might cease, ash doesn't revert to wood, a dead body doesn't create consciousness again. That's the example that they give.
다 코랑이 디 랍용디 셈랑자 수 도구 마레스 랍용디 아니 텔와 싱도 수 미도가 나시 아니 시빌룰 셈lar 수 도구 마레스 랍용디 이네 나자 타고 왔다 시빌룰들라 나자 타이도 왔 네디 메버 소야도 왔 아니 네 메버 소야사바 이나 아니 류니도 왔 아니 긴 우글레디니 룰리 중고요레 셈디니 룰리 중고요레 다 우다 셈케라 바르제칭이게 아니 나자니 멘지신이 소야사소 왔 다 가르치니 깨고 말이지 걔랑 이제 렌 야고 그랬을라.
So here their analogy is when there's wood, the wood undergoes a change which is irreversible because fire comes and burns it and transforms it into ash. The ash does not return back to wood. Similarly, a body that's alive, when disease comes and intervenes, it prevents the body's ability from creating consciousness, so then the body dies. If the disease goes away, the body would not come back to its ability to produce consciousness. Even though this is what they're saying, Acharya Dharmakirti asks further, he says, well, technically it should, because when the body now has been treated and disease has been reversed, or the ailments can be reverted in a dead body, now there is no more obstruction for consciousness arising. Furthermore, you have also said the body is the cause of breath. And then you said when the body and the breath are together, then that leads to consciousness. So your example is not sufficient. Why, in a body that has died because of a disease, if the disease can be eliminated, and now there is a body without the disease, which is the cause for consciousness, and is the cause for breath, and when breath and consciousness come together, when the body and breath come together, consciousness must arise, you still have to explain better why that dead body cannot produce consciousness still.
시빌류들라 시빌류들라 네게 시빌류들라다 네 포체 네디게 아니 시빌류를 셈미도바 가서 셈게메 수여버레스 딘디 나자디 쿠츠 자야 menji시 자야 요 마레스 라바이나 디기 마레스 마인 소주로 요처로스 네기 규월로 도과 메슬라바이나 미디디 네소비 조바 되요 바스 간데 menji시 고바 요 바스.
And so then after saying this, the opponent would turn around and say, well, no, that's not the case, because the kind of diseases that afflict a body that makes it die are not diseases that can be reversed. There are no conditions that can reverse those diseases. To which Acharya Dharmakirti says, well, that's not really true, is it? Because we've created medical treatment, like medical treatment exists. So you've seen that through treatment, diseases do get reversed. It's not true that diseases can't.
So that megi shinglo yuwaje deda 아니 내 나자기 수고를 교화계인이디 빼든 숨기 말했어. 매기 싱로 교화 당셔비 교화디 싱로 도야면이야. 아니 내기 룰루 교화 당셔바디 고추 도야 요레스. 디 도야면은 아주 미지셔를 고바 요 말았어. 고 도야 요켄디레스. 군이 빼든 숨기 말했어.
So in what Acharya Dharmakirti is saying is the example that you've given of firewood undergoing change that cannot be reversed is not an appropriate example for disease afflicting the body and not being able to be reversed, because unlike firewood, which cannot be reversed once it has been set on fire, once it has caught fire, disease is something that even though it might afflict the body, the changes that are brought about by disease can be reversed. If the changes that are brought about by disease cannot be reversed, there would be no purpose to medicine. And however, because medicine does exist, we have created medicine, not created, but we've discovered medicine. And there are certain properties to medicine that enable diseases to be reversed or done away with entirely. The example of firewood, which cannot be reversed once it has caught fire, does not apply to disease, because disease can be reversed through medical intervention.
So that this is any mobile rigminda new resta. Candice Yoreslana, any Gujinchigi, Mopochil, Gua Patang Yundi. ko gyuwa tanyang koranya sar gyudi pa dosona rangja su lo yungye gi ngobur jikjik gyuwa cheba bodi pa dosona ngargi gyuwa den doshe ngargi rangshi ngargi ngo tegarang su lo yungye gi ngobur jikjik ya gyuwa tangi jikjik la ngobur jikjik la gyuwa tangbo bodi gi ngobur de gyuwa tangche an tangking gi gyuwa tangbo bo ngobur khora doba ina ya 아니 강 땅시에게 규와디 ngar ngobo디 ngol chu maloyege ngobodi ringminda ni yores ta dig aldilada.
So there are two kinds of things. that undergo change. One class of phenomena that undergo change, when there is an agent that makes it undergo change, and the thing undergoes a transformation, there are certain things that when this agent is no longer there, which has made it undergo transformation, that thing will revert to its original state. It goes back. That's one class of phenomena. Then there is another class of phenomena that are undergoing change because there is an agent that acts on them. And when that agent ceases to exist, the transformation that it has undergone because of that agent does not revert to its previous state. So there's two classes of phenomena. One that undergoes this kind of change and one that, both that undergo change, but when the agent that made them undergo change is removed, one class can revert back to its original state, the other one does not. So there's two differences between these.
다 디니 베델라 찍델라 아니 싱라 메기 주와 타이 찍체 아니 찍라 맞아 셀라 메기 주와 타이지 와다 싱라 메기 주와 타 윤디 아니 싱라 메파르 윤디 싱디 텔라라 파 규르바디 규와 춘준지마도 메바 예나 간다 코츠 로고 말해 디 코랑 오보 코랑 수 로에 메기 규와디 차디 그랬어.
So the two kinds of things, you can illustrate them by showing how fire acts on wood as an agent that leads to transformation, and how fire acts on gold as an agent that leads to transformation. When fire acts on wood, the transformation that the wood undergoes, or it turns to ash, will not revert back to wood when fire ceases. Whereas with gold, when it's influenced by fire, or fire acts on it, whatever changes it might go through when fire ceases, that does revert back to its original state.
So 딱 아주 셀 도도질라고 메기 메파르샤베네 셀디 슈제 셀디 슈루 그래데 이네 메디파 도서나 야 셀 슈샤바 대가 랑장 나르낭신 시지야 셀 도도 랑장 오월 파 주루와.
So if you have like a solid chunk of gold or a nugget, when you heat it or when you subject it to hard, strong fire, it melts, and so you have molten gold. But the second that fire stops, it reverts back to its original solid state. So gold influenced by fire undergoes a change, but when fire stops, that original state of solidity comes back.
So that indi ngobol gyuwa tangye gyuwa cheje chu loya rangjang ngo chu lo malo rigminda ni yoba indi ane negi gyuwa tang negi lulu gyuwa tang shabadi ane nedi phache so na lugi gyuwa de chu loya yogi ngobo chimadi nang chu gi yores.
So because there are two kinds of things that undergo change in this manner, one which is reversible and one which is not reversible, disease and the changes that a body undergoes because of disease are like gold which undergoes changes through fire, but when fire ceases, that change is reversible. Similarly, the changes brought about by disease in a body are reversible when the disease ceases to be there.
That di indi ani nedi sosona ne sosona ludi ngarna shingi chawa chega chu gyurwa keje shego chigre di cheba ina ani semgi gyuzo di lure ugi gyuzo di lure di indi ani shiwi lute la semdo u midobe tewa kerangla jugres.
So in the case of gold, like it can be reversed, when there is a disease that is cured or an illness that is cured, the changes that the body underwent when it was sick because of this condition, when that condition is cured, then the earlier functions that the body could do, they come back, and that's observed. Therefore, since this disease or illnesses or sicknesses are reversible and the effects that they create are reversible, the dead body, or the body being a cause of breath, and then the body and the breath being a cause of consciousness or mind, as an explanation will not work, because your reason for why a body dies, which is disease, which then creates irreversible changes, is inaccurate, because technically when you can cure that ailment or that disease, you should have all of the previous conditions to create consciousness again, and so the consequence of a dead body being able to give rise to or produce consciousness would still be applicable to you.
다 당기기 ngobo rigminda ni yorese zawadi lar mijungwa gashingni lala yuwa kebarches. gashi dogba yimbi chir gashi dogba yinchi per shing da serla meshinos di ngobu minda ni yoba da su doghenji da madong ni yoba es ni peda chaba maso ta tangbo chungyan dogba means tangbo lar mijungwa ani lar su doya medeki gyuwa chunjunji ina ya su dogu mara tangbo chungyan dogba means ani lardo rungwa gyurje kan tenne la ya jungju de sergi sawa nishenos.
So the verses where Acharya Dharmakirti is differentiating between these two kinds of things are, in some cases, things produce changes that cannot be reversed. Others are reversible, like wood and gold acted upon by fire. In the first, even if small, it cannot be reversed. Those where change is induced that is reversible will once again undergo change. For instance, the solidity of gold. So the first 4 lines are talking about the 2 examples, and the next 4 lines are talking about how this is reversible with the example of the solidity of gold.
Deba gyuwa cheba bo gashin ne lar mijung war gyuwa kebar chede pena shingla meshinus gashi deba gyurero gashi lar dob gyuwa kebar chede sel meshinus tedar gyuwa kisu ni le negi gyuwa ni chimadar dodu rungwa yinos.
So the commentary says some things that give rise to transformation produce changes that cannot be reversed again, such as fire acting on wood. Others produce changes that are reversible, as in the case of fire acting on gold. Of these 2 kinds of transformations, the changes brought about by disease are like the latter, which are reversible.
Ta dila khajigi ya len sawash kyabar khari kyabar lana ta kisi negi lulu gyuwa che di lar dog gyuwa yimba di nge killingi yis di indi ani ne di meba sotuna lu di ani gyuwa ngar na shi lu di ngar gi ngodil su loje koran khari digu ge ni ge di nga killingi yis yina ya khari killingi mes laba yina ne changma soyeyo ne changma la minju cheyo ba di killingi mes kaisi ne la ya so miru ne yores ta minju cheyo minju gi ne yores.
So now the opponent comes up with another answer saying, sure, fine. The disease that can be reversed, I accept. There's no problem with that. I accept that certain diseases create conditions that when those diseases are cured, those conditions return to how they were earlier. But there are other kinds of diseases or other kinds of ailments or conditions that are incurable. So there are one kind of disease or sickness, and then there's another one. The other one is the incurable kind.
So the tangaran tanda jigden alo la nazar rikashe jue yo me na de khona ani to chae yo maris lagi jue yo maris lagi nazar yoro di zu pesha gorta.
So the example that they're giving is like we have certain medical conditions. What do we call them? Fatal. Yeah, we have certain things that we call fatal. Is it? Terminal. Thank you. Terminal diseases. We have certain diseases that we call terminal, which are not curable. That's the example that they're giving.
So the ta thela ranglu len khar jare chungse soja menje ba soje nye ba kachiran sese chiros. Ta thanda nganzo gi so mirung we nes ne di chue yo ma ne di chae yo ma la di digi men thanda nganzo gi manye ba re ma do naza koran chue me ba ngu mares.
So in reply to this idea that there are incurable conditions or sicknesses or terminal diseases, the reply is those cited as not even slightly curable are because a cure is difficult to find or because life is exhausted. And so the reply that Acharya Dharmakirti gives is saying whatever you call a terminal disease right now is terminal and incurable only because we haven't yet found a cure or a treatment for it. It doesn't mean that the disease itself is incurable.
Karjilana ko naza yimba rikji ko naza gi ngo yimba rikji yimba yindu ani naza rikji la soya mese geje di ngazo koro ngo chane ewa che tuku mares. Ta chigla thanda menye che menju tangje ko gyuwa che tuku yoba yindu ngazo so tuku yoro ko gyuwa dugu yoba thong barwa. Ta chigdal thanda ngazo menju manyere maado menju ngena ko gi ngo yan gyur gugu res chaya yo gugu res. Karjilana ko gyuwa dokhen gi ngo budi gi descend red was.
So what Acharya Dharmakirti is saying here is, when you're talking about an incurable disease and a curable disease, what you call incurable right now, or what we commonly refer to as incurable, is simply something that has not found, to which a cure has not been found yet. If it were to find a cure, it would revert to its original state, much like the diseases for which initially we had not found a cure and we would undergo change and not recover from it. But then, since a cure was found over here, even for the other kind of disease, which are both diseases in the sense that they are both conditions that act on the body and change it, because that's how they function, both of these are changes that can be reversed when you find a cure for them. So what we call incurable is just temporarily incurable in the absence of having found a cure. Because the role of a disease, or what disease does, is it afflicts the body in a manner where it brings about a certain change, but that change is curable through treatment once that treatment is found.
다야 미카셰라 아니 나자지포 나자들 민주 여바이나야 고 민주 제바이나 민주디기 미핀바 치제 아니 나자디 소마도 치제 아니 미식 시루도 와스 대야 고 네디 코랑고 소야메비 중생이 말했어 따네 코랑고 소야메비 중생이 고 시오 말해 가질라나 맞아 시에기 규들이야 세세 라이지 요랬어 가지 세세 라바이나 ngārgi pīnjīgi lējīgi lūdhī semnībūdhī ñamdhū diyāla kō lēgi pāngwīndhī lēgi pāngyāgi cēchī yorwa dī dzōba tēla cē dzōsla kurwa dī dzōsona pīnjīgi shūgi nūbadhī dzōsona 아니 dī nēga wī lūdhīla nāza khandījī yīmbayina pē nāza namchū sōya mēchūga nāza dīni mēmbachē namchū sōya yōdhība nāza yīnaya kathū tēla mēngi māpīmbachē ishīrūwa ngāza tūngudhū bās 디기 코로 나자 디네 nga라 사와 나자들라 자야 여버시 단다 사와 나자들 자야 매주 차로 딘데 말이스 고 나자 자야 여버 찍고 있네야 디 내가 러명이 미편 바디 나네 소마토 와디 류드 심니 힌지도 네기 핀지기 체드 조로도 디도 비용이요레스.
And then in other situations where someone gets sick and then dies out of a disease or out of some sort of medical condition, that death that they have undergone through a medical condition is not because that disease or that condition was the real reason for them dying. For example, we see people who die from sicknesses that are curable and they have cure, and when ordinarily someone is given that cure or undergoes that treatment, they are cured from it. But other people, even though they are getting treated for that disease which has a cure, they do not recover from it and they end up dying. So the reason why they die is not because that disease was fatal or that disease was terminal, but because what over here in the last line it says, because life is exhausted, there is such a thing called life, or I think in English it would be lifespan. And the lifespan of an organism is determined by the previous actions or the propelling actions or the karma, if you want to call it, the karma that made the body and the mind stay together. And when that lifespan or that duration of those actions came to an end, then that person died. It wasn't the disease that made them die, because with curable, ordinary, everyday ailments, you do see people who get treated for it, they don't recover and they die. So if it was the disease itself that was terminal, then there would be no cure for it, but other people recover from it. So when someone does die because of a sickness, that sickness is not the real reason for them dying, it's because their life is exhausted. So where it says life is exhausted, that's what it means. The duration for the body and the mind staying together came to an end.
Ta penangazo dinde yorwa ngobu ni chala ngobu dodo dinde minjawa ni ngazo jarzi gi su jargirwa ta kuni jarzi gi jar yongdi kuni dus ani nyamdu jarji hinchigdu neyedi ko jarzi digi ko simchi de gorwada ta ine kola di yoroda life set of sto kola koge bet kora be londo cheje be kadina kamide so sher kemido korange shukse sto 다 그런 게 슈그세기 체디 라이브디 조르디 디니 모델 아니야 그니 카테루와 뭐부 도도니디 카테루라 띵가서 통출을 열어와.
For example, when you take two things and you stick them together with glue, those two things, it's not an inherent property of those two things to be together. There's something that has intervened externally and has stuck them together. There's a glue. So there is a binding force that holds them together, but we do know and we see that depending on the quality of the kind of adhesive that you apply to it, the duration of those two things staying together is going to be determined by how strong that glue is. And if it's not a very strong glue, then it doesn't last that long. And otherwise, so we see that there is something that holds two things together, and the duration that those two things remain together is determined by the strength of that thing that held them together. For example, with glue.
딘나 신시제 가장 아주 롭스케저 중원나시 당부 ngaran suigi tini 류드 주베 고속사텔라 류드 셈니디 냠도 초 아니 디니 류드 주베 고속거래 상지 계제 셰르와 어디 인디 류심니 냠도 뚝 초체 냠도 데야데라 아니 지칭이다 먼저 마소나 냠도 두 스미에다오디 핀지기 레디체 다 레디기 슈크세디 레 칸디지기 핑기 요바나 레디기 펜세디 마조게 바동 아주 체조고요 말와 다 레디기 펜세디 조베 카도텔라 아니 아주 체조고요래 디 체조베 카도텔라 아니 치긴 나자 드리기 겐기 동에 연구래라 치진 가야 매베 토네 다 지금 남주 나차데 가야 매베 토네 그런 랑싱이 체조베 내가 그런 랑싱이 정도가 뒤에 연구였다.
So, like we briefly discussed the other day, yesterday, when you have this moment of conception where consciousness and the body they come together for the first time, there's something that propelled it into that state. And that same cause that propelled it, the strength of that, or the intensity of that, or the power of that cause that propelled these two things to be together, also determines the duration for how long these two things will be able to stay together. And once these two things have been conjoined, then their duration, because it has an extreme limit, it has a limit for how long it can stay together. When they come to be separated, or when they come to the moment which is called death, that can happen through external conditions such as diseases, sicknesses, and so on, or it can also happen by someone who is not necessarily sick or does not undergo any kind of physical transformation because of disease or sickness, they also die. And that death, in both cases, one might be influenced by external conditions, one might not be, but the reason why they cease to be together at a certain point is because the intensity of that propelling cause is now brought to an end, it completes itself.
디 인디다 남바 상게베 아니 시위 규디라 네바시 마레 네바시 치위 규 마레 핀지기 레세바야 고 시위 규로 깨지시에 여버와 어디 인디 핀지기 레세니 시에 깨져 여바 인디 네 차야 여바 있나야 시위류라 아니 셈랑저 수 도고비 네바 여 마레 남바 상게베 세나 가진라나 시위 규디라 아니 네바시 치위 규 마레 네 대마이 뭐 셴바도와 디마차나 고셈수 도도 마레 딱 가지 캐나라 치비 유디 네 바시모도 셰야 요마르와스 레다 샴바기 남시 게지 셰야 요마레 코네 바시 게지 인두간라 아니 네디 소소나 아니 랑자셈 도고베 테와 무투니 니그레스.
So that's why if you have this understanding, or you present the reasons for death as a termination of lifespan, or a conclusion, or an end to the strength that was that the propelling cause had, then when someone dies from a disease, even though that disease may be curable, they don't have to come back to life, because the propelling cause, which was also necessary for death to happen, that's now terminated. And so if you can account for a cause that is not merely a disease or a medical condition, then you don't fall into the consequence of having to accept that a dead body will give rise again when it is inflicted by disease, or when it dies because of a medical condition. Whereas you, the opponent over here, who are saying that there is no such discussion of mind or propelling causes such as karma that is a reason for death arising, and you only write it off to sickness that intervenes and the body dies because of that. For you, when that disease, if it can be cured in a corpse, then you really don't have any good explanation or reason why a dead body should not give rise to consciousness once again. And so for you, the same consequences apply. If you account for a different kind of cause, you don't fall into this contradiction.
또 디자와 가리기 된 거래. 네 바식 이나 소미 네바 니스.
So this is explained by these two lines which said, if faults were sufficient, nothing cannot be cured.
다 제바 네 바시 치비 규이나 소룸 민베 네 메바 니임베 시베류라 셈 라인 초바 규비 네바 손은 네소스.
So the commentary says, if only disease was the cause of death, there would be no incurable diseases, and the faults of a dead body, once again bringing the mind back to life, would remain.
다 직진의 결함도 고뉴의 유래 아니 미카시 시제 다 배코론 technical sekoro menju nanglo ni ko du cheji da kan de shi che chuju ka she de ni ma chi ni de ro che ya rang ja chu so yu ni de ni su yor da ngazu delos le ta chik chong ne yangja yang su lo su bu rang su lo yung delos.
Maybe you've heard of this. It's in Tibetan it's called Delok. I think returning from gone beyond. They're like some beings who return from death. They come back from death, and where medically you are dead for a day or 2 days or a certain amount of time, and then you come back to life. There are certain beings like that.
Ta ngazu nangam pyo na lo ju din yor ta delo chong che ani dini nima sha kha shi din chi yan la yan jelo pungbu su lo je ya di che yung e dini ni zu yor.
So in Tibet, it was quite common, or it was well known that there were people who would be dead. They would show signs of having been dead for a day or 2 days, and then later, then they would come back. They would be animated again. I don't know, but I don't know if that's the same thing. No.
Bed chong sa ba de.
This is dead. Near death is when you're on the verge of death. It's not the same thing. Here you look like you're a corpse for a few days and then you come back.
So za ngazu gi mido khongma de wa re da mido kume khongma me ro shuksip se ani gu ba ji yore ta de la shuksip jizun lo chen se ji chung yore ta morang nya thangbo di che kimba che ani de ji baru la gen ji che ji morang chong ani shabu kha she la an di je la rangja na ba she bu zu ta morang dini chong che ta namshi töndu de an ta ngazo thangi geje she de pardo se ya ro shamba yunguru bata geje de yorwa an dini ni su lo yongdu an morangi ta nizu mangbu ji thong che an morangi ta namshi gi kor de da na shi gewa nga ta gewa chima de pardo de mangbu ji thong che dini su lo yongdu morang semba be gyur che an chöle shu ten kimba rangi ten genyi rangi toni chöle shu je an jela ta nenjurma chenpo shu chab, nenjurma pe kera chenpo chab, shusi jizyong lo chen se diyo ka la di pe lama chenpo dindegi dini pe wanglu menga sensa ki lama chab.
So there's a nunnery here called Shuksep, and in Tibet, maybe the previous generation or the one before that, there was a lady, Shuksep?
Jizyong lo chen.
Jizun Loche. There was a lady who was a householder called Shuksep Jizun Loche, and she passed away. She had some problem, and then she passed away. And after dying, then after a few days, this body came. It became reanimated, so it came back to life. And what she experienced, what she recounts, is that after she died, she went through all the standard things that we speak of, which is bardo and all of those states. So when she passed away and she went into those states and she saw how birth happens, how consciousness moves, what's happening in that intermediate state, it had such a strong impact on her that when she came back to life, she had a complete change of heart, a complete transformation of mind, and she devoted herself entirely to practice. So staying an ordinary householder, Shuksep Jizun Lochin, she then became a very highly realized yogini who was also then the lama of many people, or many important lamas of the previous generation. They relied on her and they received a lot of teachings from her. So she became a lama for many of these very famous lamas of our previous generation.
Morangi kubar che yorta.
There's actually a photo of her. You can see a picture of her.
Ta dindegi nisu di ngazo kyawa ngaji kheli nengi peba chiku maare nge nyama luju thonga chigla ta documentary chik thonga chigla chige lungba chigla doctor chi thonga che chuzu kazu sa chuzu ita geju kazu shilani nima kazu chagla nisafil nima chigru bada o dindirwa o dindir tuzu chigi ringa la kono bedran thongba che an dinini ya rangja suyo do ko rangja ya suyo che an diko la dikor gi di nega bi amji re di nega gi tini neyo re ani nangmi re ko thongdu ga nangmi su nguya du samo ko tiwa thin chi documentary film chi thong.
So this is not something that only happens to believers in reincarnation like Tibetans, but actually there's a documentary that I saw recently about a Western. There was a doctor who died, and for 80 hours he was declared clinically dead. And then, however, later he came back to life. There's a documentary on him. And in that documentary, there's a lot of questions, and they're asking him questions, and they're asking a lot of people who were present at his, I guess, death or at his funeral, who were crying and who were weeping for him. So it's not something that's limited only to Tibetans and believers in reincarnation. It's something that happens.
양 베베 라마지 시겔 땡이 베베 라마지 총체 총네 아니 그런 풍부디 캬감나를 로제 제가 그런 수수에지 캬감 동지 저 때문에 깨져지도.
Then there's also another story of another Tibetan Lama who was in the West, who passed away, and they put him in on ice, when they take corpses and put them on ice. And after a few days started banging on the door, asking to be let out.
So 딜라마 딜라 아니 디워트린 지죠. 아니 디디 코란 나와 가리가리 샤르면 리코딩 지죠. 디워트 되게 나 디워트신 지도. 라마 딜라 가서 미도 고마디래. 소자 직 데스 아나 게드 데스 타고도 유디 니로바지 이툴로 빠베 콜 내가 때도와. 소자 고다 직 mongo지 디스 캄베 직도 직 가시 디스 고민도 ngala 빠블 빠베를 유버시 디로바시로 해서 아니 디 콩기 리코딩 디 인터뷰치 상원이 그런 디 쉐이드 나올라 그런 두 테크니컬 더 총바레스 안 디난다 디 버로 코랑이 나와샤라 나와다면 샤단도 계제시 안 젤 코랑이 쓰여디 강보 디 차감 나요 디 하고요 그 고동이 그런 상황 디버티시죠 니디 예 총수디
This Lama is someone from our previous generation, and after he came back to life, there's actually a recording of what someone's asking him, saying, "What happened? What did you go through?" And a friend of mine was, because his accent, his dialect is a little difficult to understand. One of my friends who had been asked to write down the recording, there were certain Khamkya words that he couldn't understand. So I listened to them because I was familiar with that dialect. And so I've actually listened to the whole recording and helped him out with this. And in that recording, when they ask him, what did you see, what did you experience, he's giving all these explanations of saying, I died, I saw certain things, I had certain visions, whatever, like I saw certain things. And then at the end of it all, when I came back, I found myself in this fridge. And so then I started banging on the door.
다 어딘데 디 송자 다 디인지디게 파수 류심이 년에 지기를라나 시위류라 세미도에 태와 파타야 아니 술을 내가 장애들을 랭 칸디스 중에 줄린디 드롭다.
So up until now, what we've gone through is the reasons that the opponent gives for why a dead body. So first is the challenge of trying to show why a dead body does not generate consciousness, the answers that they give, the reply that Acharya Dharmakirti gives, then how they retort to this, and then again how Acharya Dharmakirti responds, bringing to a close this discussion of how, if the body was a substantial condition, it would have to produce consciousness even if it was dead.
다 dinima tiwak sawash tangiyor. 다 tiwak sawa kharitangrilana, 다 lusemgi nyelengina, ani semgi nyelendo kelenggi ludi karires, 다 lugi munjindi karires 다. 다 luresene doktor lashaw mahimba, 다 kirama ma papche, 다 dunse sora ochichi pa zugusu shos 다 nyelen diresene kiran karal kawale shigiyos, di kiran munjichi shos.
So now there's another question. So now this is another argument. From here there opens another argument, which is, okay, so now let's get into a little bit more detail. If you say the body is a substantial cause, now don't just say body in this kind of generic, larger sense, but what exactly do you mean, or what part of the body, kind of like if you were kind of getting into an analysis of it, what do you mean, what body is it that you refer to when you say that the body is a substantial cause of mind?
다 딜라 인데 아니 거기 랭카리 좀 말해 류기 두텐디레스 다 류기 류스미 니네 지게래 류디 류라고 계지시기메스 류기 나로기 두텐디네 계지시기요스 류기 두텐네 시기요스.
So the opponent here says, I'm not, when I say the body is the cause of consciousness or the mind, I'm not talking about this coarse physical body that you see. There are these particles which the body is composed of. Those are the substantial cause of mind.
수자 다 류기 두텐디 니네인 슬라이인데 땅아주 된데 삼로 코나 디그와 배낭아주 레바낭로라 셀망고 쇼요르시기도와 다 어딘데 소로지 디 다 류기 두텐시도 셀 소로다 된데 도지 디 니네인 어딘데 랑게 소로지.
So the same way that they're saying particles of the body are the substantial cause of the mind, you can switch that, and instead of saying particles, you want to call it cells, whatever you want to call it. You call it whatever you want, but it's the position is the same over here.
다 델라 양제 티바 갔다래. 개대 딘디기 류기 디친 Lugi Dutenda, Chanda Kara Shade, Lebe Lebe Dutin sort of Dutamu sort of say you look in Yelenchi Yobayina, Tiwaniba de la, Ona Lebe Nangola, that Dutin Mangoyo was, Dutin Chingma, Dutin Mangoyo was. So Dutin Rigi and you look in Yelenchi to Yorbe, Yang, you look Yella, Dutin Mango, just thorn in Yelenchi Gores, Tiwatamir. Look at Dutin Kun Sopan Yelena Gugurbe, Yan Regi, you look in Yelenchi.
So the answer, or not the answer, once a question has been put forth, the question then gets further divided or further clarification is sought, where they say, when you say the particles, so you can even call these the particles of the brain or the neurons, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You find whatever is an explanation that is given. And then the question that comes is, well, okay, but we also see that there's not one individual such particle, right? There's many of them. So when you say these are the substantial cause of the mind, there's an error in the thing. I've changed it. Yeah. If you're saying that these are the substantial cause of consciousness, then what do you mean? Because since there are many, do you mean each one individually is a substantial cause of the mind? Or are you talking about all of them as a collection, or that all of them are required to produce the mind? Which one is it?
다 당보디 켈렌지 두진 망보 초과 디기 아니 일로기기레스 라바이나 다 일로게를 두진 가가 소고고 유미 딕체 라고 봐. 체 라고도 아니 딘디기 체디 마사나 일로기기 요 말이스 다 딜라고 치고 봐. 소저 디인디 말루 균이 이나니 야나직다 테나미스 다 계란기 루기 두둔군 소바 디기 일로기 니네 치기래라나 당부 루기 두둔군 소바 직샤 안 딘디 소바디 샤니 디기 아니 다 일로기 그레스 다 디낭로라 아니 두딘 딘디 일로 니네 치기래 라바이나 다 랑루 가르탄고래 오나 딘디기 루기 두딘 딘디 마소나 디는 두딘낭 차시직 제바이나 자동 창요 말로다 초고에 다도 창요 말와 아니 일로 미키스 라고 치기로 봤어 딘디 라고 치고이나 아니 가르래 간주 밀라 아니 셰바게 발라 두딘 소고나시 야 심진 셴바든도라 간주 다 디나시 다다 창 초고에 녀바게 믿어 봐 디인디 결혼 말루 초고디 일로 두딘 니네 기기레 슬라이디 결혼 라투 마레스.
And so, of the two, which is it a collection of all of them, or are they individually the substantial cause? If we look at the first one, which is the collection, it says, if all are the cause, without even one part, it could not arise. Which basically means if you're saying that all of them are a cause, or a collection is a cause, to be able to posit a collection of a cause of consciousness, you have to give a minimum requirement. Like there has to be at some point a minimum requirement that is necessary in that collection for you to create consciousness, or for you to create mental consciousness. If that is the case, then there are all sorts of living beings of different sizes, different shapes, different, species. And if there is a minimum requirement of physical matter or particles of the body that are necessary for you to create consciousness, then if even one of that is missing, because it's the bare minimum, if it's the bare minimum, then if one is missing, then you don't meet that requirement, you should not have consciousness arise. But that bare minimum is also not verifiable across the spectrum when you're talking about all sorts of creatures or living beings that give rise to consciousness. And therefore, if that's what you talk about in terms of a collection, if all are the cause, without even one part it could not arise, suggesting that if all were necessary, then even without one, you would not be able to have consciousness. But that doesn't seem likely, because you have beings that are so small and that big. And so what is this bare minimum that's required for creating consciousness?
The Indu Malu Guni in an Yanachik the Tena means Deba. Look at Dutin Malubo Soba, Yilu in Yelu Guina, Yanachik the Tena, Yilu Miki with Euros.
So the commentary says, if the collection of all the particles of the body was a substantial cause of cognition, even if one is absent, mental cognition would not arise.
Ta Nibotanas, Maresta, Luke Dutin Regi Yiloke Nuba Yorista.
The second option is no, it's not the collection of all of them, but it is each one individually that acts as a cause for cognition, substantial cause.
Rere Nuba Nina, Chicher Mango Juma Gurs.
if each one was capable, many would arise simultaneously.
다 두진 레레레레네 아니 일로케기 뉴바 요바이나 아니 강 가조 레벨로 두진 망보 요바인데 아니 강사직을 일로 똑바 망보 아니 뒤직을 깨야 되는데 용쇼 그래 일로 똑바 망보 뒤직을 깨버디 태기를 했다 두번 찍저도 강사직이 줄에 일로 똑바 두번 찍저도 중어 규로스
If you're saying each one individually is the substantial cause of consciousness, then it would follow that because there are as many particles there are, to the same number you should also have mental cognitions or mental cognitions that arise in a person simultaneously. Because all the substantial causes are multiple and there are many of them and each one is a substantial cause, it would result in, or it should mean, that many minds arise within one person simultaneously. So the commentary says it would follow that in a single person, multiple mental cognitions would arise simultaneously.
다 디카도라 셰고에 내가지 가리어스라베나 nganzu gyula khaduyne yilo tokpa chigmato ani yilo tokpa mangbo yo mari.
So what's important to understand over here is that for us, at one moment in time, there can only be one mental cognition. Mental.
소장 yilo tokpa gyu chigsta yilo tokpa gi shebatila gyun chigmato medebchi. 소장 yilo tokpa gyu mindawa ni du chigle keje yo marta. 다 가서 뒤 민다와라 뉘라 베나 드링 콩도서로스게 베나 추주 단다 추주들라 두주들 콩도서로스게 야 추주지기 제라야 지 닝지서로게 참바서로게 코딘데 림바신 용구로 일로 도바 나로라 용구에 대인에 디상마 일로 도바 카레 균직마도 일로 도바 찌기 균마도 일로 도바 민다와 균인데 깨지시기요 말.
So when they say, or when it is said that there is only one mental cognition at one time, what we mean is one continuum. So what we mean is you can't have two separate continuums or two different mental consciousnesses that are arising parallelly simultaneously. What you can have is, first you can get irritated, then in the next moment you can feel very compassionate, you can cultivate a lot of love, you can experience love. All of these things happen in different moments in time, and even though they are separate mental states, they are all arising within one continuum. So there's something that connects all of them. They're part of one continuum. Whereas not with continuums, but not within one continuum, two different mental cognitions or two different continuums, those can't arise at the same time.
다 빼나 차샤면 한다 뒤로 매도시도 와. 다 뒤에 매도 되라 매도 마부지도 매도 까부지 니도 되라. 도와. 다 대가나 신기야 매도 마부 대가랑라 로마단디 카가 디도와다. 소자 다디 맞아 일로 똑바기 일을 치는데 똑배 일을 치는데다. 똑배 일을 치는데 뒤지 찍라. 다 매도 카도 마부들도 뢰 일을 치베 카도 되라. 매도 마부지 똑바 대코라마도 디 내가기 아니 로마지 똑바게 두고요 말.
So for instance, you've got these flowers in front of you. There's red one, pink, red ones and white ones. And then, like if you look at the white flower has petals and the white flower also has these leaves. When you then think of them, so when you're conceptualizing them or your conceptual mind is now thinking of it and you are thinking about the white flower with its petals, simultaneous to that thought, another conceptual mind that is thinking about the leaves cannot arise simultaneously.
So that ngobu dige medo dige kiju mangbo yobe nanglo kiju chigla ani yite ba yana shambadi samoko lega cheri gaado.
So with the conceptual mind, what ends up happening is if you focus on one aspect or one quality of something, one attribute of something, the ability of that conceptual mind to remain on other qualities or other attributes gets compromised. And so you can't have focus on one quality while simultaneously another one that's holding on to another quality.
Di indi yulo tokwa di khatu ina ngobu chigla ma jug yungdu, ngobu chigla ma yutila ma jug yungdu, ngobu di korangi namba ina ngo ina keju ina kari ina ko chik ma do mangbu nyamdu ku tujigla korangi di chegi lega diyo mare.
So that's why the conceptual mind, in one given moment in time, it can either pick or it can either engage in the aspect the aspect of the nature of the thing, or one attribute, or one single quality, or whatever it is. Whenever it engages or focuses on any object, it can only focus on individual aspects of that thing. It can't really focus on all of them or engage in all of them simultaneously.
디 인도다 오부직라 키주 두마 여베 나로니 키주 두마 여베 나로니 키주 직수 셀니 일로 똑바기 지야마도 상만냠도 일로 똑바기 죽음에바 손자 nga도 똑바 신주래 키주 들려버스다.
So the reason why we call conceptual minds eliminative engagers is because when they engage in things, because things actually have a lot of properties, but when the conceptual mind engages in them, it eliminates everything that it's not engaging in and engages only in single things at one given moment, which is why they're called eliminative engagers.
디레 소자다 디 일로 똑바 고랑기 조단기 개바시도와 다디 일로 똑바디 그 셀니 주구구 여베 줌젠디 상말은 냠도 죽모토 고 셀니 주구구 줌젠디 다 튠지도 제발 다 고랑기 나와다 고랑기 나와지 가장 아주 나와나시 고랑기 똑베기 나와지 야디스 다 쇠베 쇠라바이나 다 쇠라기 요면나 나와지 두세 디강네 코 율 주구구 여바인디 오다 넘버레레레 샤바다 유텔라 주게지.
So this way of engaging, which is this eliminative way of engaging, is just how it is. That's just how the conceptual mind works. That's how it does its thing. And the reason why it ends up working like this or functioning like this is because, like we discussed the other day, the conceptual mind, unlike sense perception, I don't know if it's appropriate to say it creates, but basically whatever appears to it is something that is generated by the mind itself, and because it generates these images or these aspects, like we briefly said, it's meaning generality, but it generates these aspects, and when it generates an aspect, it can only generate individual aspects at a given point in time, which is why the way it engages in things is as individual things without being able to engage in the complexity or the totality or something.
소자 디 인도다 뒤직라 일로 똑바 찍마도 니기기면 nga도 용의 카타도 그래.
Which is why the fact that there can only be one conceptual mind at a given point in time is something that you can experience in your own, like by yourself.
다 일로 똑바를 기직나지 리모만고 여베이디 기지레레레레다. 기지레레레레 유카카카카카카카 진 아니 상만냠도 수 dom용도 nga저게 아 이게 거기 디 상마 통송스다. 거기 수기양 니 수기양 일라 체도송 거기 다양 일라 체도송 디 상마 일라 체도송 세 nga도 일로 똑바게 라이베디 그 유인기 촉과 가능한지 계시죠.
So when we say where you remember someone, where you say I heard them, I could see them, whatever, so you kind of like, you have a complex image in your mind. That complex image, or that thought that you have a complex image in your mind, or a complete image, is because individually there have been individual things that have been picked up at each given moment, and when you accumulate all of them, or when the continuum of all of those individual appearances is brought together, then there is this idea that you have engaged in a complete or a complex thing, whereas actually all there really is all of these individual moments that seem to get united in this continuum. And so you're talking about it in terms of a collection of different moments that gives you the idea that you've thought of something in its complexity.
다 디다우래. 맞아 롱이 따다우시. 다 롱이기 빙쇼디 강다 코 액션 레레레기 디마도 요마르고 콜라. 요마르디네 코디도 시지 꼬라꼬르지 무드네 찌기지를 찌기 무드네 튀갑체도 땅샤도 안가죠 고니슈고도 차상 독스코 드로와데 계제샤와도 상황 냠도 뒤지지를 지기로서라고지 nga도 통로와 이네코 레레레마도 빙쇼강을 디메로 숭예다고디 이네코 두스 균투지 땅샤도 ngazo 디샤르고르와 어디나시 nga조게 단다 캐나서 ngalata 되갈라 니 속통기도 일로 도박이 속이 일라체야 다야 일라치기 참아 뒤지를 지기로서 나오지 가실놓고 주버 하장 유르부 찌기질 찍도 제줄로 일로 도박이 누구 여바인데 일로 도박 찌기 아니 상마도 생기로서 나오지 여러데 말해 카가
So it's kind of very easily understood through the example of when you watched movies on film, where it was different frames that were all put together, and then when these frames they are projected on a screen, because there's a certain speed with which it's done, it looks like there's one thing that's doing multiple things, but actually it's individual frames that are all following in quick succession. Similarly, while you're listening to me, your mind might think that it is seeing and it is hearing and it is whatever else it might be doing. It feels like it's all happening in one moment, but because the way in which it engages is really fast temporally, it's a combination or a collection of all of these various things that seem connected with one another, in the same way that when you project a movie, that film with all of the different frames seems like they're all connected with each other, but actually it's an individual frame that then kind of gets subsumed as one whole. So the conceptual mind is also doing many things at different moments, but it seems like it's one kind of whole.
어디래 소자다 디인디 다 디세고래 소자다 ngazu nyongwe thone yilo tokba do chije kanda 두제를 yilo tokba ching마도 니도 기기메바 인디 아니 yilo tokba kiegi nyelendi 두진 참모디 임바이나 아니 두진 참모디 망고 슈도 왔어 nyelen pe mango do was다 yilo tokba kiedi 두진 코다와 두진 망고 빼도 왔다 지고 지상 요대 봐 디인디 아니 대창만래 일로 똑바르를 깨고 지그로 왔어. 아니 뒤지지를 일로 똑고 망부 깨쪽으로 왔어. 소다 뒤지지를 일로 똑고 망부 깨투고 여봐인데 아니 일로 똑고 지기 다사모탄 일로 똑고 지기 수사모탄 일로 똑고 지기 미다바곰 일로 똑고 지기 셴바곰 상모 뒤지지를 제쪽으로 왔어. 어디 제도금도 왔어. 소다 일로 똑고 도마 가진 깨고 말이야. 계란단에 깨고 왔어.
So when you experience it yourself, you can see that there's only one individual thing that's happening at a given moment in time. But if now, coming back to the text, if all of these individual particles were the substantial cause of the conceptual mind, each one of these particles is there simultaneously. And not only are they there simultaneously, they're numerous, there's many of them. If each one was a substantial cause of mental cognition, since all the substantial causes are there simultaneously, all the substantial effects should arise simultaneously, which means in one given moment, you should be able to think of that, think of sound, think of another color, think of a shape, think of impermanence, meditate on this, do hundreds of things simultaneously, because all of those preceding substantial causes are all separate and they all exist at the same time and they all produce consciousness. But this does not happen. You don't have this multiplicity of thought in one moment, and that's why each one cannot individually produce mental cognition.
답변한 가져와 두사만디와 가장 가르치는 가져 사무시다. 데빈이도 일레체 사무다. 쳔베 일레체 사무단 거봐. 소다 디 일레체베 카도데라 일레체베 투지 태가랑 갈라. 로디 마가바 토니 로디 무디 규르데베 토니다. 데빈이도 사무단 데베 투지 태가랑라 로 태가랑기 디카도 투지 태가랑라. 중규르 마음바 가르치기미 산이 가르치기미 플래닝 지 냠도 사무다. 냠도 로니 연구도 연구도.
So you can try this out. You can sit and you can try and recollect what you did yesterday. And while you have a clear recollection of what you did yesterday, try and see if that same mind, in that same moment that is remembering what you did yesterday, that same mind in that same moment can also now start creating plans for what you want to do tomorrow. That same mind in that same moment. If you see that these two things don't arise simultaneously, then you kind of have, you can see it for yourself that this does not happen.
So that 데빈니스 일을 제베 카두기 셰바디기 마음바기 차시 사모타의 플래닝 디고 로 대가랑기 제기 말해라 코란다 냠도야 아니 제기 로 셴바양 깨도문도.
So that itself can't do it, but along with that, neither can there be another one that while this is remembering yesterday, now a separate one comes up that starts planning for tomorrow.
So that 일로 리비기 두텐소라고 간다 두텐 참무디 두텐 딘데지 일로 똑배기 년년 지기 유나 아니 일로기 년년 망고 유두가라 아니 두제직라 데비니스 텐지다 마음버 차지당이 일로 니가 깨초고다.
Whereas if the particles were the substantial cause for these different minds, since those are all there simultaneously, there isn't any good reason why, while you're thinking about or remembering yesterday, at the same time you have another mind that should be able to try and plan for tomorrow. There's no reason why it shouldn't happen. In fact, it should happen because the substantial causes were both there.
어 딘디기다 뒤치글 일로 똑같은데 깨 망고 유나 깨 두고 여버이나 다 단도 디스로시지 일로 두딘 류 두딘 시지 되면 거기 뭐 깨요 서 태기도 봐. 기스 든디 깨로지 여바이나 맞을 펜사로다.
If there were actually all these different minds that could arise simultaneously because they were being produced by these particles, it would actually be pretty helpful to us to have all of these different minds.
가르쳐나 일로도고 찍데 최니 일로도고 찍야 샴바테 못다 뜻을 끼우지 돼도.
Because you could listen to teachings from one mind and you could watch a movie and relax and do another one at the same time. That doesn't happen.
사모제도도.
You could technically do a lot of good things at the same time.
소소다 단데 일라고 그래. 레레 누바 니이나 직접 먹고 중앙 교수.
So that's what the root verse says. If each one was capable, many would arise simultaneously.
강사 찍이 줄래 일로도고 두만 찍저도 중앙 교로스.
The commentary says it would follow that in a single person, multiple mental cognitions would arise simultaneously.
다 딜라 가지기 렌자래. 녀레 망보 요랬다. 녀레 류기 두체 망보 요래데 얘나야 두제 찍라 창막이 냠도 샤바께 두고 말해서 가질라나 아니 녀레 텔레 샤바디 깨 일로도고 깨와라 야 긴hin지 시긴지 거로와 아니 hin지 시긴이야 녀렌도 충분 hin지 시긴 망보 민도 hin지 시긴 찍 모두 민도 hin지 시긴 찍 모두 매바 인데 hin지 시긴 찍고 디기 아니 녀레 두체 강라 거기 hin지 시긴이나 텔레 샤바께 기래 샤바든들 샤바께 두고 말해서 딱 거기 렌디 껴냐.
And then now the opponent gives another response saying, sure, that's true, but there are many substantial causes at the same time, but the cooperative conditions, which is now they're going to say the cooperative condition is breath, that's singular. So even though there may be many substantial causes, because at a given moment in time there is only one breath, which is a substantial cause, there is only one cooperative condition that can combine with one given substantial cause at a given moment in time, which is why only one mind arises at a given moment in time. This is their objection.
답변은 딜라고 했다. 네, 가서 매도 답기도 와. 매도 답석이 자만 해요, 와. 네, 주요 버체. 네, 줄라 매도기 사변주 또 룩. 따이네 사변주 룩요데 사변디 상말로 매도 주 계획이 수수수 매도를 계획이 누버를 주 요래데 이네 다디 상말로 아니 추룩으로 와. 다 디르 디 상말로 추 작르를 구구 요바이나 추 작직 모드면나 다추 작직디 가왈루나 텔메도 기기를 샴바든절라 메도 기기 사변 요르디 메도 기기 마르와스 가이슬 낀직 모드도 와스 오디나신데스.
So the thinking here is if you have 10 pots and you plant them with 10 seeds and each one of these seeds has the ability to produce an effect or to produce a sprout. But if you've only got one thing to one thing to put it with and you only put it in one, then the one where you are watering, that's the only one that's going to give rise to a flower. So even though you've got 10 potential seeds to produce a sprout, the one where you will water it is the only one that will manifest. That's kind of how they're thinking of it.
어디인디 낀직 모드 민도스. 따오나 낀직 모드 메기 찐디 가르레스나 욱드레스. 욱직 모드 요 말레스.
So what is this singular condition now that you're talking about? It's breath. So now they're saying no, now there's only one condition. With many substantial causes, there's only one condition. That condition is breath. It's a single breath.
낀 욱중우 도마 찍저 메비 치르스 가지기.
And so the opponent says, if you object by saying, so if the opponent says, it is not so because the condition, many breaths cannot exist at the same time.
다 델라랑루 가르세고래 우 도마니도 충배칠 중우타는 예제 민스 다 류기 뒤텐 도마 여바나시 맞아 레바기 뒤텐 도마 여바나시 욱델라양 욱 도마 여레스다 욱 도마 여바 인도간라 욱데야 도마 여바 충거레스.
So the reply is because of being similar as many, breathing cannot be what determines. Because, so what Acharya Dharmakirti is saying is the way you're saying that there are many particles at the same time, even breath technically is similar in being many like those many particles. That's why even breathing cannot be what determines the reason for only singular mental cognitions arising.
샴반 느지 찍라 야 우코랑기 닐레야 루이스라사르바스 케랑게.
The reason why even breath will become multiple is because you've also further accepted that the body is the substantial cause of breath as well. So once you've accepted that the substantial cause of breath is the body, In the same way that you have many particles, they'll also have to give rise to many breaths. So you can't also say that there are not many breaths once you trace that back also to the body.
손자다 욱디 간이 충벌에 슬라바이나 욱이 일레야 류니 충벌 슬라비도 아니 걔는 류디 가르레스 욱 중사 류디 가르레스 슬라바이나 야 걔는 düdin지를 깨지 셔고 지그레스 디 düdin 투마 요르바스 디 인디 아니 욱 투마 깨지 셔고레스 디 인디 아니 단다 걔랑게 욱 중의 찍모도 매와 손자 아니 일로도 찍모도 끼기 말레스 닐레 망고 요나야 일로도 찍모도 끼기 말레스 에도 두지양도 두고면도스
So it's kind of the same thing as before. And it's saying, well, okay, fine. So you're saying breath is the condition. Where does breath come from? And if you say breath comes from the body, then which body is the cause of the breath? You're going to end up having to say again the same thing as before, which is there are the particles. So if the many particles or the collection of particles, the same reasoning follows. And if you say many particles are the cause of breath, then there's many particles, there should be many breaths. At which point then you can't say that there's only one breath. The same reasoning from before will come and contradict again this position of yours that there's only one breath.
두만예도 충비칠 중무탄의 예지 민 자체.
Which then the root verse says, because of being similar as many, breathing cannot be what determines.
제바 우중무 두마 찌저 매베 일로레레 코나 깨와 예지 민데스. 우기 녜레 류코나리 깨와 되베 두마 찌저도 깨와 유가 충비칠스.
So the commentary says multiple breaths not arising at once cannot be what determines mental cognition arising in single instances, since breath itself has been asserted to arise solely from the body as its substantial cause. Because of this, the faults of many arising simultaneously are the same.
다 델라카지기 양자 우주견시 우중무레레 코나 깨와 인시나스다 두즈레레레레 우중무레레레 뭐 띵마레스다 우중무기 녜레 당기 깨져 샤바나시 류된 가왈 깨져 샤바이나야 And
here now the opponent kind of insists or carries on saying no, but that's not the case. Only one breath arises at one given moment.
And Dilara Ranugi, Chingni Naya Mangsu Tejutadu Nesheros. Like Karangi, Ujumu Tuzil Ujumu Chimoto Melana Digiresta, Ujumu Chimoto Melana Digir, Ujumudi, Lungdi, 상말에 캡이 유로 왔어. 룽디. 룽 두제질 우중을 찍어도 매반티 수분 내 망볼 캡기도 왔어. 수분 내 찍어도 아니 룽 매반인데 인지 말어 왔어. 수다서 수분이 내 망볼 코두스 캡르고 여바 인도 강라 아니 녀랭 가져 망보 여바는 디 상말로 우중을 찍어도 매네 거기 캡투고 왔어. 캡투고 여바 인도 아니 코 녀랭 망보니도 아니 게 우중을 찍이 상말로 캡투고도 디 인도 아니 가르치는 일로도 오토마틱 말이야. 이제 예바 자가랑 주고레스.
And so then Acharya Dharmakirti says, okay, fine. Let's say that there's only one breath at a given moment of time. But that breath that you are now talking about, that breath does cover a large part of the body. It's not like it's only restricted to one particular part of the body. It does somehow pervade or it does spread through the body. So wherever you have those particles, there is also one single breath. So it's not many breaths, fine. It's one breath, but that breath does cover or does spread out to different parts of the body, that single breath. And so wherever you will have those particles and that one single breath that's pervading all of them, or that is kind of covering or spread out to all of them, all those particles should get animated and therefore they should be able to produce consciousness. So the verse says, even if one, many would manifest because the causes are always present.
딱이시 우중우 디기 우중우 찍어도 매바 디기 아니 년년 두테 망고에는 상말을 캡기 말했어 다간다 찍을 캡인데 찍을 캡기 말했어 그 찍찍이를 마도 캡기 말했어 깨지 셔베이나 아니 두지 찍을다 두지 찍라 마도 듄을 숙통 왕 미기 셔바기 숙통야 나외 셔바기 다 고양이 버디 두지 찍을 연구요래 두지 찍을 치기요래 왕신이도 두지 찍을 끼기요래 다나 신기 미기 숙통에 카도데라 강발라드니 이제 사다로스 랑바이나 regja ji nyongba yina di regja nyongba lushi ni di gi yorta ta di du kala ni regja nyonggen gi kangba la ji sorwa ji chongba yina ji tukba yina di regja nyonggen gi lushi de da dyun la ji sugdo sha yona sugdo tongyen gi wangshi ni bu ta koran ni sheba ni bu di du ten yelen khagaro wa wangshi ni di khaga yin yelen khagaro wa yelen khaga yimba yindu kala dindi gi yelen khaga yode gi du ni de bu tela 아니 두제직라 우주무디 현지 지기 제 라고 왔어. 이걸 캬바게 제셔고 가지고는 왕신이 냠디기도 왔어. 또 왕신가디 직접도 계획해 주시고 와. 어디인데 아니 우중의 찌기 왕시행아 기에게 두팅아 되라 왕시행아기 년례 주비 두팅아라 두수직을 흔지시긴 제토고요나 캡토고요나 아니 이로도 기에게 결혼 두팅만 보시기도 네 정말로 우중의 찌기 참아도 깨져 시에 통하고 디인데 아니 년례 우중의 아니 이로도 가진 듣게 보면 어디시
So, if you're saying, however you insist, no, that's not the case, there's only one mental consciousness that arises because there's many particles but only one breath arises, and you can't speak of a single breath covering more than one single particle. If you still insist on that, then however you do notice or we do experience that our senses, so our sense perceptions, all five of them work simultaneously. So you can be hearing something while looking at something. You can be looking at something while your leg starts to itch. And so while you have this physical sensation of an itch, you can also look at it. So you do have the sense consciousnesses that are all working simultaneously. These five do work simultaneously. Now, if you say that the substantial cause of consciousness is a particle or is some sort of material, particle, then the particle that transforms into the I consciousness is going to be the substantial cause of the I consciousness. And the one that's transformed into the consciousness that experiences the itch down by your knee is going to be the substantial cause of the itch down by your knee. Because both of these arise simultaneously and you keep insisting that there's only one breath, you're also going to have to explain how that single breath can spread out simultaneously to a particle that's here and another one that's down here, or not just here and here, but all five of the sense perception. So if you can say that there's only one breath, but that pervades or covers spatially all the areas that are included in all the different sense perceptions, and now you're also saying that the particles and the breath is the substantial cause, the particle is the substantial cause of mental cognition, and there's only one breath. If that single breath can pervade all the particles required for sense perception, why can't it pervade all the particles required for mental cognition? You can't separate between these two, and so equally, the way you have many different sense perceptions, you should also have many different mental cognitions.
어디인데 아니 우중어를 코나께와 인슬라바이나 증인낭야 망설주 대주다도 녀셔로스 제바 대단하게 뒤지길래 일로망고 세와 주데 녀린 두팀 두마다 긴 우주부티니 아니 다도 녀버려 예시스.
So the verse is, even if one, many would manifest because the causes are always present. And the commentary says, even in that case where you say only single breath, in one instant, many mental cognitions would arise because the substantial causes, which are the many particles, and a single breath are always present.
다 디카도들 남샤 시행고에 지카르스나 가도 남시 초죽 세션 남시 초죽체 초죽은 나네 당봉아디 왕시행아디체 왕시행아부디 셰바디 균직 말이 균카가 셰방아디 균카가 다 남시 초죽라디 남시 초죽라디 상마 수수도 균카가 초죽 요레세고다.
So one thing to know here is there's this it's described as there being a collection of six consciousnesses or six consciousnesses. So when we say a collection of six, we say mental and then the five sensorial ones. So you have the five sense perceptions and then you have mental perception. When we say there's a collection of six, what we mean is the continuum of each one of these is separate from the other one. So they all have individual continuums. There's an eye sense consciousness that has its own, an ear, so on and so forth, all the way to the mental one. So we speak of six consciousnesses.
So that 투지직라 왕시행아냠도 깨두고요래 일로 똑바 민다고 칸이 깨두고요. 다 민다베 캐버들.
So the difference is that in one moment in time, you can have two sense perceptions that arise, or two sense consciousnesses that arise, but not two mental ones.
디인도 아니 일로 똑바들라 센주 왕시행아부디 뒤직을 깨두고 가지라 놓고 율을 주게디 유기 남바수 가리 왕보를 때바 대가는 주게마도 코랑은 남바파 주고 매바 인디 둠주스라제 다 센주 둠주기 캐바시오다.
So the distinction here is being made between those two kinds of consciousnesses, one which we call eliminative and collective engagers. And the reason why sense consciousness can engage in many things is because the way it engages in things is merely by the external things that generate impressions or images in the sense faculties. Because sense consciousness engages in its object purely through the power of things that are reflecting themselves in the sense faculties, you can have many of them. Mental cognition, however, works on an eliminative process by eliminating things and creating its own images individually by eliminating everything else. That's why that can't exist. Two of those can't exist at the same time.
다 디콜라 연결 14부 디시 고야에 이네디 키랑소다 바제 루링 나로 게라기 시에도 거그래 이시모
So this requires another extensive presentation, but you will definitely come across this presentation in Lorik with Kishima.